Okay, hello again, art history students. This is Unit 1, Lecture 2. Today we're going to talk about the elements of art. This is like the fundamental building blocks of art. There's part 1 and part 2. If we did it all in one video, the video would be very, very long. So this is kind of the beginning video. Let's jump right in. So these terms are the fundamental language for how we discuss art. A lot of the vocabulary words that we're going to talk about today, you as college students are probably already familiar with. So I really like to use the analogy that the elements of art are the ingredients of art. They are like the onions, peppers, tomatoes, and garlic. And then the principles, which we'll talk about later, are how those elements are organized. That's like the recipe. Is it going to be salsa or is it going to be pasta sauce, right? Even though they have similar ingredients. So in this video, we are talking about all of these elements of art except for space and color. They are kind of the two biggest. They take the longest to discuss, so they're going to be in their own little video. I'm going to talk about how these elements are used in art and what they can communicate in art. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking to you guys about what a shape is and what makes a shape. You should grasp that by the time you reach college. Okay, so there's communicative qualities to line. Vertical lines are going to create this sense of authority and stability. Horizontal lines are going to create this sense of calm, passiveness, slow time, and then diagonal lines are going to communicate action, drama, fast time, right? So it's odd to think about, but line communicates a lot. Let's look at some examples. So this watercolor by Winslow Homer has this, you almost get the sensation that time has stopped, right? It just slowed down, right? How long have these people been here? How long are they going to be here, right? There's this like, almost like this super calm passage of time. So if you're looking at an artwork and it has lots of horizontal lines, you're probably going to naturally get a sensation that this is like a slow, vast horizon, right? It's just a difference of distance. Okay, vertical lines create a sense of authority and stability. This is both positive and negative. It is not by coincidence that all of our government buildings will have those vertical pillars out in front of them, right? That is to denote that the courthouse is a place of stability and authority, same way with Capitol buildings and all that kind of stuff. This can both be positive and negative. Think of jail with the vertical bar cells, right? Jail is a really stable place. You know what's coming next. You know when you're going to go to bed, when you're going to eat, etc., etc. So vertical lines create a sense of stability and authority. Diagonal lines convey motion and action. Anytime you watch a superhero movie, I'm going to make several superhero movie jokes, I guess, in this little video lecture. Anytime you watch any of those and like, you know how they'll like momentarily go into slow motion, it'll always be when there's kind of like a diagonal line in the image, right? Showing that there's this action taking place. The camera will always pan. It's just something to kind of like, if you like superhero movies, take a little bit of note of that the next time you watch, or any action movie. Okay, shape. Shape, the big thing I'm going to talk about with shape is the figure-ground relationship. So a shape is defined by the background, right, or the negative space, and then the positive space of the shape. So I have this little image of this cutout snowflake. The red is the ground, and the white is the figure or the shape. But then we have this little shape, all these little shapes that are created by the negative space. So those are shapes that are not really there, if that makes sense. But because our eyes perceive them, they oftentimes become a big part of the picture, this figure-ground relationship. Let's look at this in action. This is M.C. Escher's work. This is a woodblock print. So we have all these horizontal lines, right, happening in the background, but that's not what this artwork is about. So here at the bottom, we have this fish, and the black is the background, the positive figure of the fish, and the black background. And then as we move up the image, right, those kind of switch, and the black becomes the figure of the bird and the white becomes the background. So M.C. Escher is playing with that figure ground relationship in this artwork. Okay, value is our next element of art. So value refers to light and darkness. This is what creates depth and shadow. So think about it like this. There is a line that creates the barrier of something between the figure and the ground, right? So that line will create a shape. But depth, right, and value is what gives it three-dimensionality or the illusion of three-dimensionality. Right? So we're taking this, we started with a line, we created a circle, then when we add value to it, it becomes a sphere, right? That is how form, shape are created, right? So these elements of art are building on top of each other. It's pretty much by design, the order that they're given to you in. So value is light and darkness, and everything that you see in the three-dimensional world as you look around you is going to have value to it. It's going to have areas that light are hitting it and areas that are less light in shadow, essentially. Okay, forms in 3D. So we've kind of been talking about all things flat up to this point, line, that's kind of like the examples I've given you. So now we're going to kind of look at forms in 3D. This has to do with building off the idea of value. So there's two ways that we think about forms in 3D, which has to do with mass and volume. Let's look at mass first. So mass occupies space. It suggests that something is solid. It suggests weight, but it does not necessarily mean heaviness. Think of the illusion, again, of a superhero movie where the Incredible Hulk picks up some giant boulder and throws it, right? We have this illusion that that boulder is this heavy, solid mass of stone, but in kind of movie magic, it's probably foam or something like that, and it's probably not that heavy at all, right? So this object is both taking up space and it is heavy. Volume, on the other hand, takes up space and occupies space, but that space can be moved within, right? So there's this giant spider, this giant stainless steel spider right outside of the Guggenheim in Spain, and people can move underneath of it. You can move inside of it. You could think of it as like, what size box would this object need? If we were going to put it in a box, the box would be way larger than the weight that it implies. Here's a really cool example from Rachel Whitehead of volume and mass. So there were this house in England that was it was set to be demolished. So what the artist did was she filled the volumetric space, so the space that people existed in, the space that they lived their lives in, the people that had lived in this house. She filled that with concrete and turned that volume into a mass, then demolished the outside of the house. So that volumetric space that people used to move in through could no longer be moved in through because it was a mass now. So there she's playing with that relationship. All right, texture. How we understand texture. Texture is twofold. It is actual texture, right, which is how something actually feels when you touch it, and then implied texture, which is the illusion of texture. Now, this is important for the art world because oftentimes like when it comes to two-dimensional artworks, paintings and whatnot, there is no real texture, but there's the implication of it. Let's look at this in practice. Actual texture, right? So Vincent van Gogh's painting has this stucco style, right? This impasto painting is the technique that's used. And then this outside of this Jomon pot actually has these ridges and lines that you could feel with your fingers. Those are actual textures. Now, this artwork, which we're going to see multiple times this semester, we're going to see it probably about 4 times. We're going to talk about the Grand Odalisque. So this is our first time seeing it. So we're looking at kind of the background of all those silky, fabricy textures, right? You can almost feel the silkiness because you have touched silk and fur before and your brain remembers that experience. So it can imply a texture based off of an actual texture that it remembers, right? I'm saying texture a lot. So the implication of a texture based off an actual texture that you remember. With that in mind, I want you guys to look at Marriott Oppenheim's object. Now, imagine drinking warm tea out of this object, what it would feel like against your mouth, right? What your tongue, when that warm liquid goes into your mouth. Now, if some of you are going, ugh, right? That's important because it shows how strong implied texture is, right? Because it's attached to one of our other senses, because it's attached to our sense of touch, we have a much stronger response to it, right? This ties back to the last discussion where we talked about aesthetics, right? So aesthetics is not just what you prefer visually. What you prefer visually also is tied into all of your other senses, right? That's where we're going with that. All right, moving on. So time and motion. Motion occurs when objects change location or position. That is like the physics definition of motion. Now, artwork deals with time and motion in a vast variety of different ways. For most of human history, that dealt with storytelling and specifically events. So it's showing the passage of time in order to communicate a story. Because for most of human history, people were illiterate. The idea that most people that you encounter in your life are illiterate is a very, very new phenomenon in human history. So we'll kind of talk about that first. So the passage of time. So this artwork is about the story of the meeting of St. Anthony and St. Paul. I'm not going to get into these hermits that met each other. There's a cool story behind this. But it is not that there are three identical twins who happen to be on the same road together. No. The way it operates is the kind of background image, the smallest image of the man is what happened first in the story. St. Anthony sets out on this journey. He goes around through the desert, mountains, whatever, has an encounter with a person through a forest, and then finally meets St. Paul from there, kind of at the end of the story. So it's about the storytelling process, right? This is called the linear method, and it deals with narrative. That's what you guys need to take away from this. Okay, implied motion, just like there's implied texture, there's implied motion, there's implied line. All of these are going to have an implication that goes along with them. So there's like an actual thing and then an implied thing. So implied motion, we've got Bernini's Apollo and Daphne here, right? How are we getting this idea of implied motion? Look at all these diagonal lines, right? The whole artwork is just a series of diagonal lines, right? And this artwork is showing the dramatic climax, we'll say, of this story where Apollo pursues Daphne, and then finally she says, I'd rather be a tree, and there's a whole storyline that goes along with that. A lot of storylines that go along with art, but we're going to keep moving forward to keep time down. Okay, so what elements of art are used to create implied motion in this artwork? It's very different than Bernini's, which we just saw, but both have implied motion. I'm going to give you the answer. All right, so diagonal lines, right? We have sort of diagonal lines happening here, right? Repetition of shape and form, right? You can think of these kind of like all of these feet that we see, this repetition of these, the repetition of all these feet here. And then there's the shifts in value, right? So where is the object exactly, right? How light is hitting it. If light and value are what gives something definition, what's happening in this artwork, right? There's these shifts in value that are kind of creating the implication of motion. So why did we do that? Because that's what this week's discussion is about. So I have chosen this artwork here. This is a Greek fresco, the bull leaping, right? So I want you to look at this and tell me what elements of art are implying motion. So please tell me how in the artwork. Don't just list them. Don't just be like diagonal line, right? That's one of them. Kind of where is it, right? Where are diagonal lines happening? Where is there maybe not motion, right? That might be part of implying motion. What is, right? What is a thing that's not in motion? Is it stable? Right. Okay. So you need 100 words for full credit on that. All right. Next, we're still dealing with time and motion, is kind of how real motion is happening constantly and how an artwork can be associated with that. So in this artwork, the solar rotary, I'm sorry, it's basically where the sun, the motion of the sun, this image was taken at high noon, and I cannot find an image of it where it's like at 3 p.m. or something. And then this wire thing at the top here, right, will cast the shadow. The shadow will move to different locations. And there's different locations on the ground implying different times of year, kind of like morning and dawn, that kind of stuff. Maybe solar, what am I trying to say? Not eclipses. Oh, moving on. All right. Next is kinetic art. So this is art that actually moves. This is Alexander Calder's artwork. This is in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., so not that far away. Hopefully, maybe some of you have been there. That would be awesome if you had seen this. So how does this move, right? It's kinetic art. It is art that moves, but it does not have a motor or anything like that. It's made of aluminum and steel, and as people move through the National Gallery of Art, they create a little bit of disturbance in the heat of the building, right? So more people in there moving, breathing, talking, etc., right, is going to create just enough kind of air currents for this object to ever so slightly move and change shape. It's very hypnotic. It's one of those things, it's not moving very fast, but it's just enough where it's changing visually. It's kind of very meditative to watch. So that's a kinetic example of kinetic art. Okay, so the elements that we have covered thus far are line, shape, value, sometimes referred to as light, form, mass, and volume, right, which are really part of form, and then texture and time and motion. Next video, we're going to talk about space and color. Remember to check the syllabus and sort of the course calendar for when all these discussions are due. I don't put those dates or anything like that in these videos. So make sure you're checking all that so that way you know when everything's going to be due and get it in by the due date. I'll see you guys next video.